Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop a sub, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out.
Julian, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you today, sir?
Hey, Eric, I'm doing great, and it's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to come on.
Yeah, absolutely. So when your resume or whatever came across my my email inbox, I was immediately interested for a variety of reasons. One, because I need to start traveling more. I've been grinding, and so every time I look to plan travel, I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of work, and I just don't do it. And then a month later, I'm like, I need to get away, and then the cycle continues. And so I was like, yes, I can ask him all of the tips and travel stuff. But for the people listening, can you do a quick intro, kind of who you are and what you do, so people have some context into your expertise and what we'll be talking about today. And then we'll do the question from the last guest, and we'll hop right into it.
Sounds good. Yeah, my name's Julian Kheel. I am the CEO and founder of PointsPath. We're a company that creates travel tools that help you better use your frequent flyer miles. I've been studying and professionally studying travel loyalty programs for upwards of 15 years now. Before that, I was in television as a writer and director. Originally born in New York, grew up in South Florida. And then I've spent most of my life in New York and LA. So that's the quick 30-second version of me.
Yeah, it's good. So I always feel bad when the questions I get from the last guests are like real. Anyways, how would you define life if you weren't a human?
How would I define life if I weren't a human? Well, that's interesting because I think that I'm a firm believer that this sort of physical being that we are in is not all there is. I don't know if there's a God or not. I don't, necessarily feel like I have that. I don't feel qualified to answer that question, but I do feel like there's more to existence than just this physical being. So when you say, how would you define life if you weren't a human? I don't know. It would depend, of course, on what I was, but I would say that it depends. I would say that I think I already try and define life as being more than just skin and bones, and I think there is a soul, if you will. I think there is something that exists onwards and maybe existed beforehand. So I would define life, I think, the way I do now, which is be more than just the sum of your parts, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I'm always interested. I'm always interested when I get questions like that from the last like from whoever it is. I'm like, ooh, that's a tough one. I wonder how that's gonna go. So it's always a good place to start, for sure. So when you were normally, I can think of a segue from the answer into what we're gonna do, but I can't at this moment in time.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
tough for both you and me. Yeah.
100%. So, okay. So I want to start like your interest in travel, or as we were talking before, lack thereof. Where did this, like, when you're little, is travel something that's on your radar? Obviously, kind of from what we talked about before, was something that you were not a fan of. But where did the kind of the spark of turning it into something that you wanted to do for a career pop up? And the reason I ask, and I think I mentioned this on the phone when we spoke as well, is there's a lot of people, I think, and people who listen to the show all the time are going to be tired of me saying this, but it's very hard for people to find something that they like doing and also can make a living from. And so for me, I'm always interested in that side of the story. It's like, okay, somebody found an interest and they realized they needed to make money, and somehow they were able to make it work. So where did that start for you? Was it like, walk through like kind of the whole story of you hating travel into the interest and all of that?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, when I was young, when I was a kid and even through college, I was not a huge fan of travel. I did it and I did go places outside of the US and things like that. And I flew when I needed to, but it wasn't something that I particularly looked forward to. My interest was in television and film. And that is the career that I really started out in. That's what I studied in college. And that's what I did for really the first 15 to 20 years of my life here in New York and also out in Los Angeles. I was a writer. I was a director. I did, films. I worked in television. I did a lot of different things out there. And where the travel came from, and through all of that travel was, a part of my life, but not a big part, not an important part. Where that all changed was actually one of the last jobs I did in television, which was as a director for World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. And I was hired to direct all of the backstage scenes, the scenes where you see two guys in the locker room or behind the scenes and they're having a conversation and there's a scene or a vignette that plays out that advances the story. I was hired to direct all of those. And I did that for 2 years straight. And each of those shows, each of those WWE shows is done at an arena around the United States and sometimes even overseas. And every week it's a different arena. And on Monday nights, they do Monday Night Raw from one city, and then they go to another city to do Friday Night SmackDown or whatever show it is that they have. At my time, it was Friday Night SmackDown. So when I got hired for that, it was a travel job, right? I was flying from city to city and back and forth from Los Angeles every single week. And so I found that, and when I took it, I was like, I don't love it, but I'll do it because I was interested in the job. I thought it was a cool job and something that I didn't want to turn down. And I found that very quickly, within a month, I really grew to love the travel. That all of a sudden, any trepidation I had about flying, about being on the road, completely vanished. And that does go to something that I really do believe, which is that if you're really if you don't feel comfortable about something, do it. Just do it. Do it. And very quickly, I think when you do it over and over, you'll find that you push yourself out of your comfort zone, and then whatever it is that you're doing becomes part of your comfort zone, and it happens fairly quickly. So after that happened, I was on a plane all the time, and I did that, and then I started traveling more, and that then led me to travel rewards, to travel loyalty programs, because everybody who works for WWE, everyone is doing the same travel schedule, also knows their points and miles because it's part of what you're doing. So there's this sort of subculture there at WWE about people saying, are you going to be American Executive Platinum this year? I think I'm going to stay Delta Diamond. Everybody knows all the ins and outs because everybody's on the road all the time. So I quickly learned all of that part as well. And when I was done at WWE, which I did about 2 years, then I had this knowledge. I had these skills from being a writer in Hollywood. I was sort of ready to move on to something different. And so I transitioned, and it didn't happen immediately. It took a few years. I transitioned into being somebody who wrote about loyalty programs and wrote about frequent flyer miles. Fortunately, there's a huge number of people who are interested in that topic, and the industry has grown tremendously in the last 10 years when it comes to that, mostly due to credit cards, and we can talk all about that later. But anyway, that's how I made that transition from television and film to travel and travel loyalty, and then eventually to owning my own company that covers those topics.
How did you end up in where? So I want to keep us there for a little bit. The TV film.
That was a lot. I know.
Yeah. No. It's all good.
A lot all in one answer.
The TV film interest, was that an early interest as well? Or yes, not as well? Yeah. That was the early interest. So okay.
Yes.
So what's the strategy then, right? Because lots of people go to Hollywood and they're like, I want to do whatever, and it doesn't work because they didn't get XYZ auditions, and there's 27 screaming girl number ones in the audition room, or whatever the case may be. Is so where'd the interest come from, and then what was the path/strategy for you to get there and become successful? Because you don't end up in the WWE story kind of room without having some level of success first, right? That, as people know, WWE is very the storyline is what drives the thing. You need to create the heroes and the heels and whatever else, and so you don't get to that point without having some semblance of body of work beforehand. So when the interest starts, what piqued the interest, and then what was the strategy towards becoming successful? I don't really, my familiarity with Hollywood is not that big. So I guess what was your first big job, or the first you broke through the door, and now you have the experience that you can be okay, I worked on this thing.
Yeah. So as far as starting with the interest, I was always interested in TV and film and directing right from a very early age. I mean, I can remember making little silly videos in, junior high and high school and things like that. And this was back many years ago when there were no iPhones. There were, if you were recording a video, you had some, big camera that you had paid $2,000 for, that you were, lugging around. And fortunately, my parents were very supportive of that and helped me do, with the resources to it. And I, they saw that I was eager to do it. It wasn't just a passing fad. And I found places when I was younger, down in Florida where I grew up, there was a little like video editing store that I started hanging out at, and then who hired me to come work there for a little bit. So anyway, so that interest was there. I can't necessarily point to any specific thing because I just sort of always, as a kid, was
Yeah.
interested in making videos and making TV. I went to Syracuse then to study TV and film, and there's a lot of debate nowadays of should you go to college, should you not go to college. It's ridiculously expensive, way more than it should be. Even when I went, Syracuse was expensive, but nothing compared to what it is today. And my answer to that is always, what you're going to pick up at college isn't even necessarily the skill set. It's the people you meet. It's the networking. That's where the value is. So I don't know. And I've gotten many jobs in my life, in my career, because of people that I knew or worked with or met at Syracuse, or even just saying, oh, you went to Syracuse. Oh, so did I, come on in and talk to us. I do think you do better finding jobs with an existing network, with people talking to people, versus just throwing in a cold resume. That's a tough road to get a job. In any case, after I graduated Syracuse, I moved to New York, and my way in to the industry was, in fact, to make my own stuff. And I was not just writing, but also directing, and I directed a short film called Exceed that did very well on the film festival circuit. Again, back then there was no YouTube, there was no Instagram, there was no TikTok. It's actually in a lot of ways I think it's easier now to break in, because if you make content, it's very easy to make content quickly and inexpensively, where it wasn't in my day. And it's also very easy to get it in front of a million people. You don't need, a television network or a film studio. You can, do it yourself. Now it has to be content that people want to see. And there is a lot more noise out there than there used to be, because there's so many people doing it, but the channels are there and they're accessible for almost no cost, and in some cases zero cost. In any case, I made a short film that did very well on the festival circuit. And that's how I ended up getting agents, and that's sort of how everything got launched. And throughout my time in Hollywood, I continued to do stuff on my own. I eventually directed an independent feature film, and so I built my body of work not just by being hired to do things, but also by doing my own stuff. And I think to this day, that is a great way in. There's countless stories of social media, people getting picked up by Hollywood, getting opportunities in TV and film from stuff that they did on social media. And I still think that is a really great way in. Now you can go to Hollywood and you can, go to auditions and pitch yourself and do all that. And I think there's value in that too. But I don't think you should be doing that exclusively without also creating your own content. In other words, if you're going to do one, do them both. The only thing that is really restricting you is time and effort. So especially when you're young, put all that time and effort into your career, into what you're doing, into your dreams, and give it all you got. And it may or may not work out, but I always say you don't want to look back at the end of your life and say, gee, I wish I had tried. If you tried and it doesn't work out, then at least you know. So at the very least, give it a shot and give it your all.
Yeah. What kind of time frame are you in Hollywood, or in the kind of the film world?
Yeah. So I graduated Syracuse in 95. I was in New York for about 6 or 7 years. Then I went out to Hollywood. I was in LA for about 15 years. And then I came back to New York in 2016. So I was, by the time I came back to New York, I was already basically moved into into loyalty programs and frequent flyer miles. So yeah, I probably did about 20 years total in entertainment.
Can you talk to some of the maybe? There's like four things I want to ask you, and I'm trying to figure out how to word it. So when you go to Hollywood, I think around that time, okay, I'll just say it like this then. I don't recall, and I was talking with one of my friends about this the other day. It's like I don't recall the last time I was actually looking forward to a movie that came out of Hollywood. And on by the same token, I don't recall music that I've listened to from a kind of um like music label produced artist. nor the last time that I've like, and the TV shows that I watch are all from the era that like you were there. So for example, like, I know Psych was not, um, I don't remember exactly where it was produced, but like those early 2000s kind of crime shows or whatever, like
Mm-hmm.
those are still the ones that I watched,
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
the new stuff that's coming out. And so when you're there, how is there like a maybe not bubble's the right word. Bubble's not definitely not the right word. Like kind of it seems like at least from maybe this is just a product of the age that I am as well. But in that time, it seemed like everything that I was consuming was coming out of there, and now even 10 years after that, none of it was. So like, can you talk to the like when you first got there, like kind of what it's like? You guys are producing stuff is like stuff is grossing big like the first Transformers was grossed like $1 gazillion at the box office. That was 2007, which I happened to watch last night. Shout out to that, or 2 nights ago. Found it on Hulu. But anyways, point being like the when you first got there from to when you left, like that's a big transition. So can you kind of describe what it was like when you first got there? And then I know there's a lot in kind of the context of what I'm throwing at you, but like I want to know basically what it's like when you first got there and like how you saw it kind of change a little bit, like what things were changing. Obviously, one of the biggest things would be the rise of the internet, of course. That's the simple answer. But I think from what you saw as like on the ground there, like people leaving, people coming in, there's new things, record labels are failing, different things, maybe. Yeah, I will. Yeah, go with that.
Yeah, no, like you said, there's a ton going on. Right when I was there, there's a couple of things happening. First of all, music industry, which I, to be fair, was not really a part of, but that was basically right before I got there was sort of when Napster first came out, which was the first, file sharing service that was all music. And that was a big deal. And that sort of was the beginning of the music industry, frankly, losing control over the music industry,
Yeah.
the music business, losing control of the music industry. And then that was compounded by Apple with their iPod and the music store, which really changed the entire business model. And to this day, I'm not sure the music industry is 100% knows exactly where it should be going. But again, that wasn't my
Yeah, yeah.
area. My area is film and TV, and there were two big things that happened when I was there. The first was, as you alluded to, the rise of the internet, and the way that affected me was that, if you recall, in the throughout the 90s and into the early to mid 2000s, DVDs were all the rage. The DVD market was how movie companies made their money. Because people, you walk into somebody's house and they might still have 300 DVDs sitting on the shelf, and nobody watches them anymore. But they've everyone built up a big DVD collection at the time, and that's how you made money. And you could say you sell it, because even whether the movie did well at the box office or not, there was no Netflix or anything like that. Well, actually, there was a Netflix. Netflix sent you DVDs in the mail. Was how Netflix worked. They had these little red envelopes, and you could. It was basically a rental service. You could rent 3 DVDs at a time. It was a monthly fee, and you'd get 3 DVDs in the mail. And when you sent one back, they'd send you the next one on your list automatically. So that was Netflix at the time, and that made everybody was able to make money that way, because people would buy these DVDs for $10, $20, maybe $30 if it was something special, and that was the business model. And when you made an independent film, you basically had that DVD outlet of how to make money. When streaming came along, that really did destroy the DVD market. And when I say destroy, I don't mean that in a negative term. It changes things, and there are always winners and losers when markets change. But the fact is that people, once streaming worked, didn't need to go physically have DVDs and didn't need to be sent DVDs. And Netflix changed their model so that they were no longer sending DVDs, and instead they were, streaming programs. And it was also this sort of, internet / venture capital model of, you get everything for one low monthly price, which is still, in a lot of ways how it's done today. So that really changed the business, and especially changed the business from an independent film standpoint, which again was something that I had been doing, and it was a lot of my focus. And it did make it difficult to get projects going again. Where before it had been much easier to raise money and get it going. That change really did make it much harder because you no longer had that DVD market to hold on to. And then from a cultural standpoint, this is sort of also what you're talking about. And I agree. The New York Times just did a study. I think it was the Times or the Washington Post did a study and found that people the recollection of culture is most fond from basically their teenage years into their 20s. That is really, no matter what generation it is, that's the time that people think was the best music and the best movies and the best television whenever they were in their late teens or early 20s. So there is some of that. But with that said, the other thing that has happened is, of course, that Hollywood has become very, very derivative and looks very much to existing IP, as they call it, and existing intellectual properties. What does that mean? That means lots of sequels, lots of reboots, lots of stuff that people they think already know. And the reason they do that is because from a marketing perspective, it's very difficult to break through the noise out there with something new. It's much easier to break through with something that people already know. And that's why they do that. So when you have a sequel to something, it's because it's something that people already know and remember, or a reboot from something from the 80s or 90s. People, oh, I remember that. That's why they do that, because it makes the marketing much, much easier. Whether it's any good or not is, of course, a totally different story. But in any case, that also changed very much while during my time there. And that also makes it harder to get, smaller, new things going. I often say a lot of times I might have been better off if I had been 10 or 20 years earlier when they were doing, films in the 70s that were really like sort of deep, like All the President's Men and things like that. That almost might have been a better time for me and my sensibilities than the time I was there. Now you live when you live. But that's those are the big changes that happened in Hollywood, at least while I was there.
Yeah, the sequel thing from a marketing perspective, makes sense. I'm sure somebody asked this question, but if you witnessed somebody ask this question and also witnessed the answer, I'd be super curious, which is like, is there not more pressure on the sequel to be good? And then if it's not good, it becomes like almost like you go on Rotten Tomatoes and it's a 0 because people have higher expectations? Or is it any press is good press? Like, is that the mindset? Because there's some so like the Marvel franchise does this very well, right? They've gotten the whole Marvel universe, and they've got 4 Iron Mans, and they're all good, and a gazillion Spider-Mans and Avengers and all this stuff, and they like intertwine everything, and is very good. And then on the flip side, I think um, Star Wars has done okay. Some of them have been decent, others maybe not. And then you look at some other ones where the sequels have just been like, at least on the review scale, just like and so was that ever asked, like, hey, maybe we should try to do something new, because if we do a sequel and it flops, that might be the end of us? And if so, what was the answer, or like what was the thinking at the time?
Well, so listen, there's nobody in Hollywood who wants to put out dreck. No,
Of
nobody,
course.
even executives or whatever, nobody wants to put out crap. But at the end of the day, the overriding factor is making money, right? And even from a creative perspective, if your movies or your TV shows aren't successful, you probably don't get to do more of them, right? Or you might you might be able to do some more, but eventually, if you're making stuff that people don't want to see, eventually you won't get the opportunity to make stuff anymore. And so, success also matters from an artistic perspective. So that's a fine balance.
Can
When
I
it comes, yeah, sure, go
interject
ahead,
to maybe a little bit more
please,
context?
please.
Is it's less of like that they want to put out something that's bad, but more like the people who are, and a lot of these franchises are like, for example, I've heard that Harry Potter is going to make a new one, and so the fans of Harry Potter are very particular about what they want to see. And so, and we'll jump into this a little bit later with other media and TV and stuff, but it feels like when the sequels come out, it's like the people who are diehards of whatever the thing is, they are like, this is not at all what we wanted to see. And not that Hollywood has to make exactly what they want to see. There's other things that go into it, creative directors and writers and scripts and stuff. And you have to cast the right people if somebody's not interested. Of course, I get all those things. But it feels like, I guess what I'm getting at is like, the reboots feel like from me, a total outsider, some of them, like the easy way out to say, okay, we'll just recycle this. And like then you go online and everyone's kind of like, well, ugh. And it's not that Hollywood purposefully puts it out, but from the perspective of the people who are real fans of whatever that thing is, then it's like, and you get the same thing with sports teams. Of course, they're like, why would they trade that guy? And there's something behind the scenes because the coach doesn't like this guy because he yelled at his whatever. Like all the things that go on that people would have no idea about. But I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at is more like, and it not that the like the authenticity is dying down, but it starts to feel recycled. It's like this is not the original. This doesn't feel creative. This doesn't feel like um it just feels like you're trying to get a buck off me by doing something that you already think that I like. And you didn't ask me what I like as a fan, just broadly speaking. And so it's like I'm not going to go see it because I heard that it was bad and you're just trying to make an extra buck off me because you got to make money to get your next uh whatever the word for threequel. Anyways, that's kind of the context of what I'm getting at. Not that they're purposefully doing it, but it seems like there's like a disconnect between what the people are looking for versus what like the industry wants to put out. And there's like I feel like there was an opportunity maybe like early 2010s or something like that to like before streaming like really took off to kind of stay in. But now when you look at, this is my perspective, it's like for me they've kind of lost the boat. Like if somebody's like go see this in theaters, I'm gonna wait until it's on streaming and I hear from 17 other people that it's good. Like I'm not gonna go unless it's like what was the last thing I saw in theaters? Maybe Endgame for the Avengers. So like that's kind of what I'm getting at.
So first of all, what Marvel had did with their yeah, lately their stuff is maybe not as good, but what they did with the Avengers part, all through Endgame, is frankly historic. I can't think of any time in the history of film that somebody has put together that kind of package of whatever it was, 18 films, 20 films, whatever it was, and made it all work and made the vast majority of it very, very good. And I don't know that they get enough credit for that.
Exactly.
And on top of it all, popular and successful on top of it all. That's really, frankly, historic. To this day, I'm not sure how they pulled that off.
So it's like why do you try to repeat that when you know like the level of difficulty? That's you know what I mean?
Well, you try to repeat it because those films, all of that made a lot of money. It's why. And of course, but you're right. It's very hard. And even Marvel itself has had trouble repeating it. And I think part of that also is that, they have now branched out into doing, TV series on Disney Plus and things like that, and more movies and all of it. There's only so many people who can do this stuff very well. And there are only so many places you can spread those people before you just start spreading yourself too thin. And I think that's part of what is going on with Marvel, or has and lately. Also the Avengers storyline, the Avengers world was very, and with Thanos at the, as the overarching villain, was very well constructed.
Yes.
Whereas I think the stuff they're doing now with the multiverse is a little harder to get into and a little harder to, and they've had their own issues with their new villains. But in any case, the Marvel stuff is really special. And again, I can't think of any other time that has been accomplished at that level through all of film. And to repeat that is really, really hard. Now, that all being said, there's always, when it comes to sequels, when it comes to existing properties, there's always this balance between doing something that the audience is familiar with and maybe wants to see again, and also bringing a new and a freshness to it. People actually the sequel, one of the sequels I absolutely love was the 22 Jump Street. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Yeah,
it's
very good.
First of all, it's very funny, very, very well done. Those guys are very brilliant, but also because that sequel spoke so distinctly to the business of making sequels, and everybody in the movie saying, look, just do the same thing you did the first time because that's what everyone wants to see. And that it does permeate executives thinking in Hollywood, and not completely unrationally. Think about it.
Of course.
If you have a child and you're putting them to bed at night, and you say, well, let's read a story, which the story they want to read is the one they've heard 100 times, right? They're like, let's read that one.
Yeah,
We like that one. And if you start off and if you make a mistake when you're reading it, they say, no. It's this way. The dragon does this. Like, they know the story. They want to hear it the way that they've heard it many times. That is human nature, to want to hear the story the same way we've heard it in the past. It's familiar, it's comfort. So that's not crazy thinking in a Hollywood way. But that being said, then you get sequels like the sequel to Men in Black, which was pretty horrendous, because a lot of what they did was simply take the same bits they had done in the first one and just do them again. And again, that's what 22 Jump Street is speaking to. You can't just rest on your laurels and take the same stuff you did and just do it again, or maybe do the same stuff bigger. You do have to do new stuff. You have to mix the old and the new together in the sequels. It's hard. It's not an easy thing to do, because when you start mixing new stuff, you're right. You get people who are like, well, wait, this is not what I want. This is what I want to see, what I see. But then when you get stuff that's new and it's good, people really latch onto it. They're like, oh, that was really great the way they did that. So to answer your question, I think part of it is just, it's a hard balance to find, and creative endeavors like making TV and movies, they are very difficult, because it's not just me. If I paint for a living, I sit down and get my canvas and get my paints and I paint, and it's just me. It's what's coming out of my head, and there's no other, variables to consider. When you're making a TV show or a film, you're talking hundreds of people, you're talking millions of dollars, you're talking a lot of variables, things that can go wrong, schedules. There's all sorts of logistics that involved in making these things, that even if the script starts off great, it can go awry at any step of the process. And it's really, and a lot of times you can't see whether it's working or not. So you put it all together at the end, and then you look at it and you say, well, did this work or not? It's really, really difficult art form. And so again, I think that's a lot of reasons why executives often say, and even creative people as well say, well, let's just do the same thing we did last time because that worked and it's safe. But you can't, if you stay safe, then you just get repetitive, and then eventually, you're right, you end up burning out your franchise. So you've got to mix the old with the new to make it work.
That's super interesting. Yeah, all very good points. I wanted one correction on the TV shows. There have been several recently that have come out that I think have been quite good. The Good Place with Kristen Bell is very good. Only Murders in the Building with Selena Gomez and Steve Martin and Martin Short, very good. And then A Day in the Jackal is the other one that I think is very good as well. I just finished that one the other day. It's super good. I love what Eddie Redmayne did with the character and stuff.
But to your point, there's also a lot of television right now that is sequels and derivative of existing product, right? Like Game of Thrones stuff and things like that. Cobra Kai, the old Karate Kid, there's still a lot of that stuff. And I mean, don't get me wrong, some of it is very good, but it is still going back to that, hey, give people what they're familiar with, because we know we can get the eyeballs to it. Yeah.
Like I think Monk, the TV series, they made like a movie recently, and so did Psych has made 2 or 3 movies. And those have been pretty decent, I think, or at least in my opinion, is because I just love the show. So maybe, I don't know. But the last kind of Hollywood question that I wanted to ask you is, like, as a writer, if you're on a TV show and you're shooting a scene and the actor kind of improvs it, or like, what is it like when you're shooting well, first of all, maybe this is a misinformed question, but when you're shooting scenes, are you there as a writer?
Well, it depends. It depends. It really depends. It depends on the situation. It depends. First, it depends on TV versus film. In TV, the writers tend to be the most important people in the room, the most important people on staff, where in film, it's the directors. So it's two very different, and that's a lot of that goes back to auteur theory in films, and for a lot of reasons that's built out that way. But so in TV, there is often a writer on the set when they're shooting and who is there to maybe field questions and whatnot. While in film, it's really kind of up to the director as to whether they want the writer on set or not. And many of them do. Many of them will say, yes, I want the writer on set to help us if we need to write around something or rewrite something, or if an actor has a question, I want the writer there. And others are like, no, I don't want the writers around. So it really depends, and usually it's up to the director. To answer your question, your original question about do actors improv, again,
well, not necessarily do they, but like, so I guess just everything that you said, I want to know a little bit more about. So like,
sure.
for you sitting in both chairs as the writer and the director, you've done both things. What is it like for you when you're directing, and like, did you write all your stuff that you directed?
I usually co-wrote it, so I had a co-writer as well.
So let's go with just the when as a writer with somebody else is directing, whether it's TV or film. If you're sitting there, like, you have an idea in your head when you wrote it of like, I think it should be said this way with this tone and inflection and all these things. And so when you get into the if you are there on set as it's filming, what sorts of like things do you see as the writer? What sorts of like as they're going through the scene, if an actor improvs, because they do for sure, like has there ever been, so this is kind of like the one little anecdotal question, but like, has there ever been a time when an actor improvs and you're like, I didn't like that at all, but it doesn't matter because the director said yes? But then just generally, like, what's it like? So if an actor has a question or the director has a question, like, why'd you write it this way? And you got to do all that. Like, what's it like being on set as it's filming? And then if they want to rewrite something, how quickly do you have to do it? Like, all those things, how does that all work?
Yeah, in film, if you're the writer and you're on set and an actor does something that you're not happy with, you would never approach the actor. You would go to the director and say, hey, just so you're aware, this is, and it might be like, the way that actor delivered that line, it doesn't match something that's coming up before, coming, after that. That would be as the writer, you're seeing the whole story at once because you know it. And so you would flag that to the director. It's up to the director to then decide if they want to change the actor's delivery. You as the writer would never, ever step up and say something to an actor on a film set. That is entirely the purview. If you did that, you would be asked to leave. That is the director's job to determine how an actor should deliver a line. So that's the answer there. And same thing, if an actor was improvising something on set and off the lines, if it was important that they hit the line correctly, then you would slide up to the director and say, hey, just so you know, the way they're improvising this isn't going to match something later, that I said. And again, it's up to the director to decide if that's something they want to address with the actor or not. In TV, it's a little different. The writer would have more say in saying, because also remember, in TV, the writers know not just what's coming up earlier in the episode or later in the episode, but what's coming 3 episodes before or 4 episodes after, which maybe nobody else on set knows. And so in that case, if an actor is saying a line that does not match what's coming 4 episodes from now, that needs to be fixed. So you would still probably go to the directors because the director is running the set, but you're as a writer in TV, you would carry a lot of weight on something like that. Now, that being said, I know stories from the old West Wing, which Aaron Sorkin wrote, I don't remember if it's every episode or almost all of the episodes, where the actors were so respectful of his writing that if they wanted to change one word of their lines, they would literally call him and ask, if he wasn't on set, which he usually wasn't, is it okay if I say this line with a different word? And sometimes he might say, no, it is not. And then they would say it exactly as it was written. So it really depends. On the other hand, there's other sets where the actors are sort of free flowing whatever they want. And the actor can oftentimes have the most pull on set if they're famous. And, if the whole project revolves around them, then they're going to be able to do pretty much whatever they want. So it really varies depending on the project and on the set, on the personnel. There's no like hard and fast rule beyond what I just said. And at the end of the day, look, an actor is going to do it the way they want to do it. And you can't really change that if they think that the way they're doing it is right, and you can't convince them otherwise. Even the director can't really change that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. All right. Do you have any like crazy elevator stories before we move on in your career about Hollywood?
I probably have a million of them, but I know I'm trying to think of any that would I always do say, actually probably my best stories do come from wrestling, from WWE,
Okay.
because it's such a different environment. It's such a crazy different world. You're still telling stories, you're still doing television, you're still doing a visual medium, but it's so different than everything else. I always remember once I was there, and this was actually, I was backstage before I worked there, but not long before I worked there. And we were doing a scene. It was The Rock doing a scene, I think in the locker room, or I can't even remember, where he was talking to camera. And we're in this small room that's, I don't know, maybe 20 by 20, something like that. It's not a very big room backstage. And he's talking to camera just like I am right here, like talking to you, and I mean, he's doing this, he's doing the bit, he's acting, but he's just right here. Like he's not much farther away from me as I am to this camera that I'm speaking to right now, maybe, 6 feet. And so he's doing this scene, and it's right there, and it's very immediate to me. But everything he says is going live to the screen out in the arena, where 20,000 people are reacting to it, and you can hear them through the wall because they're right there. Like, we're on just the other side of the wall to the arena. So he's talking like this, and everything he says, you can feel 20,000 people reacting to him just talking to this camera. There's nothing else I've ever experienced that's like that. And when I worked there, it was always really, really fascinating to feel that dynamic of all these hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people reacting, good and bad and otherwise, to this conversation that I'm just having in this room, very small right here. There's nothing else I've ever experienced like that. It was always fascinating to watch it.
That's crazy. Wow. So, okay. So how do you get the offer to go to WWE? Did you reach out to them or they reach out to you, or like how did that occur?
That was I again, I had been doing, I had just finished a feature film that I directed. I had finished a post on it. I was waiting for a release, so I was between jobs. That's the other thing in Hollywood. Most people are working job to job. Rarely do you ever become like a full-time permanent staffer. Not at least on the creative side. Even the TV people usually work from season to season and year to year. Anyway, so I'd finished up a feature film that was waiting for release. And I had a friend from college. And again, this goes back to my point about one of the real reasons you go to college is the network of people you're going to meet and who are going to, affect your career going forward. And I had a friend who was working there as the head writer, who said, I have this position available that I would like for you to consider, because I know that, you've been directing, and I know you have this body of work, and I think you would be really good for it. And so that's how that happened. And it was one of those things where, I'm sure that WWE posted that job. I'm sure they got a million applicants and they didn't look at any of them, because the person that I knew and who knew me said, well, this is the person I want because I've known him for 20 years. I've watched his work. I know he can do this job. That's who I want. And that's how it worked, So, and that's why I say it's really hard to get a job just cold emailing or cold calling. You really, leaning on your network is the better way to go.
Yeah. Okay. So you get the WWE job and the story crafting that you're used to from New York and Hollywood. How different or the same? Was it an easy transition for you? And then at what point in the WWE job, which maybe we can do this as a follow-up, but at what point were you like, I want to do the travel thing? Because you mentioned you were only there for like a couple of years, right? So
Yeah. So to the first part of the question, yeah, storytelling is storytelling. Especially visual medium, storytelling in a visual medium, it's very, very, it's the same no matter whether you're doing it for WWE or Marvel or, Warner Brothers or whoever it might be, or Netflix. It's you're telling a story with camera, with visuals, with actors, with performers is the same wherever you go. From that standpoint, it wasn't different. What I really liked most about WWE, though, was that it was live and it was fast. Because what does often happen in Hollywood, especially on movies, is, the process of making a movie takes years to do from start to finish. And so it's very easy to get lost in the weeds. It's very easy to be like, boy, I'm sitting here at home writing the script for a movie that's not even going to be like on the screen for 4 years or maybe ever. It's a very, very slow process. With WWE, they'd write the script that day sometimes if they had to, or rewrite it that day. And you were doing, and because you had to, it was a live show. Whether you were ready or not, it was going up at 9 p.m. Eastern on Monday night, whether you were ready for it or not. And at 11 p.m. Eastern, it was done, and you were moving on to the next thing. You couldn't go back and fix it because it was live, and that was that. So it was very much a situation where I really loved that immediacy of it. I loved that it didn't take weeks or months or years to get something done. And sometimes it was great and sometimes it wasn't great, and it didn't matter because you were moving on to the next thing. And also at the time, you could, even now, you got instant feedback from Twitter, especially, of people watching the show, of seeing what you're doing and getting that sort of instant feedback. That was also unusual. Like when you do a movie, you don't necessarily get that, at least, not when you're like writing the script or whatever. So that was also great. So it was a really great experience. That being said, once you have done a year or two of wrestling, it is very repetitive. Yeah. It is basically the same cycle from WrestleMania to WrestleMania each year. It's the same shows. It's the same. You start going to the same cities. You're like, oh, we're back in Oklahoma City or wherever it might be. You basically, most people in wrestling, they either do it for a year or two and they leave, or they do it their whole lives. There's kind of not a lot of in between. And so when I did get to the year or two, and also the travel does burn you out. It's a lot of travel. So I got to about 2 years in, and I said, I think it's time to do something else, because I don't know that I'm growing here at all. I don't know that I'm gaining anything. So I left. And that's when, and I wasn't necessarily leaving with the thought of, I'm going to, move out of TV and film. And in fact, I did go back to LA, and I still did more television, but I did feel like, I get the sense that maybe I've done this for 20 years and maybe I could do something else. And originally it started as I'm just going to do some travel writing in addition to my TV and film stuff. And that's what I did actually for about 2 or 3 years. I was doing both. And this is another way people say, well, how do you switch careers? How do you change, from one thing to the other? And the way I've always done it is that you start, the second thing is almost a hobby. You just start doing it on the side. Maybe you don't get paid for it, or maybe you get paid very little for it, but it doesn't matter because your main gig is still your money you making gig. And then over a period of a few years, it starts to flip, where the other thing that you were getting paid just a little, people want it, people are paying you more for it. And so you start doing more of that and less of the original thing, and it just sort of slides over. Again, it's a slow process, and not every hobby is going to turn into that. Though I think a lot of things that people, if you love to do it, I always say, pursue it. There's probably a way to make money from it somehow in most cases. There may be some exceptions, but look, there are people making money from putting videos of them playing video games on YouTube, and they're making money from that, because people want to watch them play a game that they're very good at. If you can make money doing that, you could probably make money from doing almost anything if you figure it out. You have to be exceptional at that thing, and you have to figure out what is it that I'm going to do to make money from it. And you should not go into it starting that way. You start with it as like it's just a hobby and something you enjoy doing. But you can turn almost anything, there are probably some exceptions, but a lot of things into a money-making venture if you want. And that's how it worked with me with travel, is that over a period of a few years, I was writing about travel rewards because I had all this knowledge, and I had the skill set of being a writer from Hollywood. So I started writing about travel rewards just for small blogs to start, and then bigger blogs. And then eventually I got hired by a company called The Points Guy, which is the biggest website in the world that covers travel rewards. And from there, that's when I finished up in TV and film, and I wasn't doing that anymore. So yeah, that's how it worked. It was just sort of a gradual evolution.
When did the CNN thing come along?
So I worked for, so like I said, I was hired by The Points Guy. That was in 2016. That was when I moved back to New York. And I worked at The Points Guy for several years. I eventually was promoted. I was the editorial director there at the end, where I was running the site. And I actually got poached by CNN. I got contacted by CNN. They wanted to start an e-commerce section focused on money, financial, like personal finance and travel. And the reason those things go together, again, is the credit cards, and we can talk a little bit about how that works. But credit cards are sort of the linchpin between those two areas, and so they wanted to start. It was becoming a very popular and very profitable area for a lot of big companies, and they wanted to get on it as well. So they reached out to me, and I agreed to go over there and do that. That was the beginning of 2020.
So, okay, so the switch from TV/film into like journalism, is that similar in terms of like you're still writing about something that you like and you still have to tell a story, even if it's just about, instead of whatever the subject is, now it's about points. So is it a fairly seamless transition from that
Yeah,
perspective?
yeah, you just nailed it. That's exactly right. Journalism is, and I don't, to be clear, I don't consider myself a journalist. Like, I think there are people who do really great journalism, and I am not one of them.
Hmm.
But yes, you just nailed it. At the end of the day, journalism is still about telling a story. It happens to be a news story, and it happens to maybe have some real import as opposed to being, fiction. But yes, that's exactly right. The other thing I always say is that one of the greatest skills you can develop, no matter what you do, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what your likes and dislikes are, one of the greatest skills you can take to anything is writing. There is almost no business that doesn't involve some sort of writing. It might even just be writing a proposal for
Yeah.
some plumbing job or whatever it is. Being able, or writing a letter to somebody, whatever it is, being able to write is something you will use anywhere you go. So if you're looking to develop a skill that you can take anywhere, writing is a great one to develop. And this was another example of writing for Hollywood and writing in film and television, and then writing for, a story in journalism or in marketing or e-commerce or whatever you want to call it. It's still writing. Writing is writing. Putting words together is putting words together, and it's something that I've gotten good at over 20 or 30 years, and it's not necessarily something I was great at to begin with. So you like anything in the world, you get better with repetition, and you get better the more you do it.
Yeah, that makes and then some industries might have different like stylistic preferences or whatever,
Absolutely. Absolutely. But
but
those are
yeah,
easy to pick up once you
exactly.
know how to write. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, WWE had an entire vocabulary of things that nobody outside of WWE would know, words like words like kayfabe and what's the finish, who's going over, that sort of thing. There's an entire vocabulary there that would not be useful outside of wrestling, but that you can pick up, like that you can pick up very easily as you go. The key is, can you tell a story, can you write?
Yeah. So I think maybe a good transition. So let's do maybe, even though it's slightly out of order time chronologically, I want to touch on the media kind of transition piece. When you went to CNN in 2020, COVID is happening. There's a few things that are going on with various headlines and anchors. Right, Chris Cuomo's in some hot water over there at some point, and eventually was let go. There's been some clips recently that we touched on beforehand about, like, on the Colbert show, he made a comment about CNN being objective news, and the crowd laughed, and whoever it was that was on CNN was like, "Was that supposed to be a laugh line?" And he was like, "No." So like, there's an awkward moment there. Whitney Cummings on New Year's makes a crack about how CNN doesn't have any viewers, and so I also want to preface all this by, like, there's this is not just about CNN. You just happen to work there, and so we're using it as the example. Um, but the transition within the last 5 years of, like, well, even last 10 years, we'll say, of kind of the corporate kind of news conglomerate, the MSNBCs, the Foxes, the CNNs, the, I don't even know, ABCs of the world. There's been, again, the internet is a big part of this, of course, but I think there was some poll that came out that said, like, the general population's trust in those news sources was at an all-time low, things of that nature. So you were there, like, during this time, and maybe you're not on TV the same as some of the other kind of more famous names, but, like, what's the vibe within, like, you're working there, so there's, like, a vibe and a culture that, like, kind of is permeating throughout. Like, you can pick it up if you like, been at businesses where it's like, this doesn't seem like it's going well, and you're like, okay, well, maybe I won't, right? But you can kind of feel it, right? So what's going on in there? Like, what are you feeling? What are you picking up from people? Like, what's the vibes there? And then also like, there's some things that I've seen where um, it seems like maybe a failure to adapt, maybe almost like the CNN Plus thing happened and that didn't go well, but it seemed like I I don't know. There's just a lot of things that happened all at the same time. That seems maybe like the perfect storm for to well, perfect storm to sink something like CNN. So like what are you seeing? What's it like? Do you have thoughts on it from your own personal experience? Like all of the above.
Yeah. Well, I think your analysis of the situation, saying, a lot of things going on, perfect storm, is right on. Because a lot of the things that have happened to CNN in the last 5 years have been the result of many different factors all
Of course, yeah.
converging at the same time. You mentioned CNN Plus. And you say, well, that didn't go very well, and it certainly didn't, but partially because it didn't really get any chance to happen. The story there is that was launched in the middle of Discovery's acquisition of Warner Brothers, or Time Warner, from AT&T. AT&T was basically selling it, merging it with Discovery, because AT&T really wasn't a very good fit for AT&T to have bought it in the first place. So the Discovery people absolutely did not want CNN Plus to exist. They felt from the very beginning that it was not a good idea, not a good business model. But in the middle of the merger, there are laws that say the Discovery people who are buying the company cannot dictate and cannot have any influence over the decisions that are being made by the incoming company before the merger is closed. And that's for various antitrust reasons and such.
Sure.
So the Discovery people were making it as clear as they possibly legally could that they didn't really want CNN Plus, while at the same time, the Warner Brothers CNN people were launching CNN Plus because that's what they had been working on for a couple of years. So it launched and it existed for, I don't even remember, 60 days, 90 days. The merger closed and the Discovery people shut it down immediately because they didn't want it. So that was just purely, had there not been a merger going on, CNN Plus would probably still be around to this day. Whether it would be doing well or not is a whole nother story. I never personally thought CNN Plus was a good idea either. It was Jeff Zucker.
I don't think a lot of people did when it was launched.
The reason that it was launched in the first place is Jeff Zucker, who was running CNN at the time, correctly saw that traditional cable was on the way out and continues to be on the way out. Traditional cable has always been CNN's method of distribution. So if traditional cable's on the way out, how are people going to see CNN? CNN Plus was the answer to that. Now, there are other answers to that as well. That was simply the one he chose. And it made sense. Like it was a streaming play. People were doing streaming plays. That's what was happening. The other problem with CNN Plus was that it was never going to be able to carry actual CNN's feed, the main feed, because that feed is contractually obligated to the cable companies. So you were creating CNN Plus, but you're going to have to create a whole bunch of new programming for it that wasn't on CNN. That's why they hired a lot of talent like what's his name from Chris Wallace and people like that to do CNN Plus, because they couldn't use the CNN feed. So the whole thing was a little like, I don't know how this is going to work. And the Discovery people just basically pulled the plug right away. Anyway, that sort of gives you an idea of like, that's just one totally separate thing that happened, that was separate from all the other things that you mentioned, like COVID hitting. COVID obviously changed everything when it came to CNN. We all, in mid-March, like the rest of the world, we were sent an email one night to don't come into the office tomorrow, work from home. Everybody's going to work from home. And if you recall, everybody, we're going to work from home for the next few weeks and then we'll all be back. Right. And then,
and then 2 years later.
2 years later. Exactly. So, that was obviously a big factor. And look, that CNN actually, that was also an election year. So CNN actually did very well in the ratings that year in 2020. And obviously COVID itself was a big news story. But at the same time, because of what we just talked about with the traditional cable model starting to fail in favor of streaming, the media landscape, the advertising landscape was drying up, and CNN was having financial issues as far as selling ads because they didn't have as many eyeballs because people were cutting the cord. So it really has been at CNN, and then on top of it all, the whole where does CNN fit on the ideological spectrum? Fox is obviously fairly right. MSNBC is fairly left. CNN's in this sort of middle ground, but then you're sort of in this. They're saying, well, we're objective, but then who's your audience? Who is it that's looking? If you're not a liberal, if you're not a conservative, who's watching CNN? And I think to this day, that's a question that they haven't really answered very well. So yes, all of these factors have contributed to CNN sort of being where it is today. And look, CNN is not like dying. CNN is not going anywhere. CNN is still a very, is still a successful endeavor. But it may be that CNN eventually should really be spun off into its own thing. Right now, it's owned by Warner Brothers Discovery.
Yeah.
And that may not be a good place for it. It maybe needs to be spun off into its own thing. And it's probably going to have to find new ways of making money as well, which is partially then to go all the way back around what I was doing there, which was this e-commerce initiative, was just to find other ways to make money for CNN to be able to survive and thrive.
Yeah. I want to touch on one piece, or add, maybe not add, but the CNN Plus piece with the ratings piece. So like one thing I want to ask you that I think maybe I didn't articulate it properly. With the, like, generally speaking, people, like, if you ask people if they believe the news, they're like, no. It like doesn't, regardless of what the channel is. And so when all the things that you said about CNN Plus, I was like, it was doomed to fail from the beginning. The reason I thought it was not a good idea is like, why are you going to put all this money into something where people don't trust it anyways, and then you're going to ask people to pay for it? Like, that doesn't seem like a good idea. And so so maybe, I don't know if you're in a position to know the answer to this question, but if you're talking to the people in and around, like, are you getting hit with the, like, people are not trusting us? Why are people not trusting us? Like,
Well,
was that a conversation that was being had, or even like in, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
because on the internet, it was very prevalent of
yeah.
like, like the news is this and that, and we don't believe anything that they say. And then, like, within the walls of CNN, is that like, hey, people don't trust us, we've got to like sort that out? Or was that not really a topic that was approached at all?
Well, people listen. People at CNN are well aware of the overall loss of trust in media,
Sure.
and frankly, a lot of that has nothing to do with CNN in particular. It's a total loss of trust in institutions across the board.
Yeah.
Loss of trust in media, loss of trust in religion, loss of trust in government. That's certainly been the case in the last 10 to 15 years, and CNN is a part of that. I think sometimes CNN doesn't do themselves a lot of favors, as far as but as to answer your question, and I'm going to be honest, I was not privy to high up conversations at that level. That was not really my area. I don't think anybody at CNN was saying, "Oh, people don't trust us, so therefore we have to do this." I don't think that was never part of it. I think people at CNN would try and report the story as best as they thought they could. And that's what it was. I think, and this is not about CNN in particular, but it's about media in general. I think media has been has not served themselves well in the way they have reported news in the last 10 years. They're sort of relying on this way of doing it that became popular like in the 50s and 60s, and is really not appropriate anymore. This sort of, to this day, two-side sort of ways of looking at everything, versus simply saying like, look, these are the facts. And,
that's kind of what I was getting at, because you've got, as an example, now on different like internet shows or whatever, you can have somebody make a claim and then immediately be like, hey, let's like Google this real quick, and it'll be like, no, that's not true, or yes, this is true. And this is kind of what I was getting at with the sequel thing earlier, where it feels like it's out of touch a little bit. So I guess that's really kind of what I was getting at. And to your point about not being privy to whatever those conversations are, that no worries. But from the standpoint of like your own writing, was that so that wasn't really, or were you kind of insulated from that from the standpoint of like, this is how many points you get from this, and like that's kind
Yeah.
of it?
Yeah, I was not doing politics. I was not
Yeah.
doing any of these sort of hot button issues. You know, when it comes to personal finance, it's pretty straightforward. When it
Yeah.
comes to travel, it's pretty straightforward. So I didn't have to deal with a whole lot of it. Once in a while, I'd be like, well, you know, well, what about this particular story or this particular quote from somebody or whatever it might be? But generally, I didn't have to worry too much about it. Yeah, I mean, to your point, you know, look, there people are now relying less and less on mainstream media and going to alternate sources like social media or whatever it might be. And look, those sources have just as many issues as mainstream media. They're just different, right?
Yeah.
The accuracy of getting your news on TikTok is very questionable, for the reason that we just
I wouldn't recommend TikTok. Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend getting my news from TikTok because you know it's very likely to not be accurate, or at least half the time. And look, this goes back to what I said earlier. The wonderful thing about a TikTok is anybody can put stuff up, which is
Yeah.
terrific. And democracy is great. I think the more voices can be heard, the better better off we are. But with that said, I think what we're missing as a society is making sure that people understand how to look at information critically and
Yes.
say, okay, where am I getting this information from? What's the source? What is their background? You know, and really saying like, I mean, I don't know about you, but the first thing when I hear any piece of information, the first thing I say is, well, where's that coming from?
Yep.
You know, let me judge its accuracy based on the
And then
source.
let me Google it and see who else is
And
reporting
right,
it and all these
yeah,
other things.
exactly, right. And look, that doesn't necessarily save you from all the bad information,
No.
but it certainly at least come at it with a critical eye and know that don't just say, "Oh, I saw it on Facebook" or "I saw it on this," and therefore it must be true. That's not a good rule of thumb.
No. And I mentioned this on the show to somebody else. I don't remember what episode, but it like what I mentioned was it's gonna feel like the Wild West for a little bit, where people are
Yeah,
getting their news from X, or
yeah,
people are getting their news from Facebook, or like the community notes feature on X seems to be like a good band-aid for the problem, at least for the
I
moment.
agree. I agree.
Um,
I think that's actually one of the best features they've come up with in the
yeah.
last
And
5 years.
so
Yeah.
with like you mentioned, the corporate kind of news has not done themselves any favors, and so for the foreseeable future, everyone's going to be running with like a slightly different version of what's going on in the world, and that will create, of course, problems, and there will be different problems than the ones that were there previously. But kind of what I implored people, or my own self, is exactly what you just mentioned, which is like learn how to sift through information, at the same time understanding that people that you're talking to might not have time. They've got kids and jobs and all these other things, and like it's very difficult to go through like, okay, this is a story that came out, let me Google this and listen to 3 conversations about it and look at this other article, and all of a sudden you've spent 4 hours looking at this topic.
Right.
And it's like people don't have time to do
They
that.
don't have time. That's right.
Right.
That's
And
exactly right.
and
Yeah.
not only do they not have time, but then like if you're just wading into this, then like you don't even know what to look for. You don't
Right.
even know what like who has this slant and who is coming at it from that perspective, and it becomes an almost impossible task if you've not already like you've been in, I'll say like the broader film journalism world for a long, so like you know kind of what to look for. You're like, that doesn't seem right because of XYZ, or that seems like it's probably right even though it's not been corroborated by whatever. I've seen enough of these where it's like, okay, that's probably okay. And so like it's very difficult, and so I'm like, we're going to be in the Wild West for at least the foreseeable future, until either one, people kind of sort like there's better ways to sort through the information, or maybe there's like, I know there's several companies that are doing like kind of AI verification of things, which is also not perfect, but it's
Yeah, that's
maybe
far
another
far
Band-Aid.
from perfect as
Yeah,
it is.
so like
Yeah, I mean, it
as
could be right. Yeah, yeah,
as that's another Band-Aid that goes
yeah,
through it, maybe
yeah.
kind of like that, plus community notes, plus 1 or 2 other things, and then we can get in a place where it's like, that's okay. Um, but yeah, it's gonna be strange for sure for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is very much the Wild West out there, and I think you're also exactly right that it's going to be like that for a while. And what's interesting is that sort of the solutions to this are basically to return to a different form, but similar form to where we started, which is established organizations or established, platforms where people trust it because they believe it's reliable, which is where we were at the beginning with, 3 television networks and news organizations for those networks, and mainstream newspapers in major cities. That's where we started. And it's probably, now we're not going to end up there. I'm not saying we're going to end up with 3 television networks and newspapers, but a variation of that is probably where we end up, where people say, okay, that is where, I think we get reliable information. Because you're right, people don't have time to you're trying to make ends meet, you're trying to get your rent paid, you're trying to put food on the table. I don't got 4 hours to dive in and figure out if this thing I saw on social media is accurate or not. What we need is a reliable source that I trust to say, I know that source is reliable. If they say it's true, it is, like you said, likely true. But that's hard, especially when society has coming from so many different viewpoints. A lot of people don't necessarily even believe the facts of the other side. So I don't know how you eventually get to a point where you do have reliable sources that everybody agrees to. It's a difficult problem, and I agree. I don't think it's coming to a head anytime soon.
Yeah, I think kind of the thing that podcasts have done a good job of is even if they're not 100% accurate, I think people value the independence and the authenticity of the people. They're even if you got it wrong, I believe that you believe what you're saying, and then I'll go Google it. And and oftentimes what will happen is they'll say, last episode we said this, it wasn't actually true, and yada yada, and people value that. And so from the standpoint of people with differing viewpoints, then people go on different people's shows and they debate, and I think people are this is okay for it's a good we believe that you believe what you're telling us,
right?
And it's a good at least, I don't know, stopgap until we end up with whatever the next iteration of it is. And speaking of independence, so you now started your own company, and so how do you have more time? You're good on time?
Yeah, no, please keep going.
So what was the kind of, did you always want to start your own company, or was this something that popped up after you were doing CNN and you're like, oh, I could start my own thing doing this? How did that work? And then when did you know when a good time to pull the trigger was and be like, okay, I don't need the safe paycheck anymore. I'm going to go off and, well, not that you would be bankrupt, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I always felt in my career that I would be willing to take a stab at my own company if the right opportunity came along. I always did feel like I had some sort of a startup in me, some sort of an entrepreneurial streak in me. I had done, when I was younger, some small, companies with a couple of partners. When I did independent films, that was very much an independent endeavor, where I would be also handling some of the, financials and things like that, not just a creative endeavor. So I sort of always felt that I had at least the skill set that I could do it. In this particular case, and so when it came to Points and Miles, I'd spent many years writing about them. Because people are always seeking information, because it's a complicated topic. They don't necessarily understand how it all works. So when you're writing about it, you're trying to educate them and help them to understand it better. But it goes back to the same problem we just talked about, which is people don't have endless hours in the day to dig into stories about frequent flyer miles when they're trying to put food on the table and whatnot. So I always wanted a way to say, well, how can we give people this information without them having to spend hours digging through a website or a blog trying to find the answer? And the answer for me was, well, there must be tech we can use. There must be technology, a way we can do it with technology that will save time for everybody. And so that was the impetus behind Points Path. And the reason that it came to a head when it did, I started the company in about middle April of 23. So we're about a little more than 18 months old now as of this recording. The reason it came to being at that time was I was approached by a venture capital firm who was also interested in doing something in this space, and so that's how I ended up leaving CNN to come and do my own company. And that company has been involved tangentially at times, and they're they serve as advisors to me and things like that. So that's basically how I ended up on this track. But to answer your question, yes, I always really did feel like if the right thing came along, I would be absolutely willing to head out on my own. And also, fortunately, I've had a lot of years, and I was in a financial place financially that I was able to do that and take that risk without having to, worry about it too much. I'm not married. I don't have kids. So I didn't have some of those obligations that would make it harder for other people to do. So in that way, I was very fortunate.
That makes total sense. Do you have anything maybe that you learned working with a venture capital firm before we get into like how the travel points actually, which was the whole point, but that's
That's
fine.
okay.
Yeah.
That's the way these go. The conversation goes the way it goes. Yeah. The venture capital firms I do, and for the record, the people I worked with were terrific. They were really great. Venture capital is a great avenue for very specific type of business. And it's a business that the whole point of venture capital is that you're looking for businesses that you can scale very, very quickly and very, very large. Because with a very high failure rate as well. If you have a business that fits that model, then venture capital is a really good choice for you. But you have to be aware that once you are on the venture capital train, you cannot get off until the end. You cannot just raise one round of venture capital and then be like, okay, I'm good. I'll just, grow my business slowly from here. That's not how it works. Once you've taken venture capital money, they are going to push you to grow fast, because that's the model for venture capital. So before you do that, you need to sit down and say, all right, is that really the train I want to be on? Because it means for the next 5 to 7 to 10 years, that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'm not going to really have, I'm going to be constantly under pressure to keep growing fast. Again, first, and that has worked and made a lot of companies very, very big and people very, very wealthy. But there are also, for every venture capital success that you hear, every unicorn, as they say, there are hundreds of failures, maybe even thousands. So it's definitely a high risk, high return sort of a thing.
Interesting. I haven't looked into it too much, but there's like a term that you hear thrown around all the time, and it's kind of all that. Well, I'll have to do some Googling for sure. Okay,
Yeah.
so travel points and travel things. I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't really know what to ask, because like I mentioned at the beginning, I don't travel all that much, and every time I look into like, okay, maybe it would be a good idea to do this, and I'm like, well, I've traveled once in the past 3 years on a plane, so actually that's not even true. But point being, what should I be asking about travel points, or what do people generally want to know? Like helpful tips and tricks, how it works, things to look out for, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, so the very first thing to keep in mind, and that a lot of people don't even realize at this point, is that, we call them miles, like, frequent flyer miles. The vast majority of frequent flyer miles are no longer earned from flying. The vast majority of travel points are not earned from travel. At least not in this country. In the US, the majority of travel points and frequent flyer miles are earned from credit cards, by people spending money on their credit cards and getting points and miles in return. So that is where people make their earn miles and then use them to travel. With that said, then, if you are not a big traveler, you should probably not have a credit card that earns travel points. You should instead, if you're going to have a credit card, get one that earns cash back, that you can simply get cash back, put it into your wallet or your bank account, and then you're done. And if you decide you want to travel next year, you just buy a ticket with that cash. Travel points and frequent flyer miles are only useful for people who really want to travel, of which there are millions. So to be clear, but I do say, for someone like you who isn't traveling much, I don't know that I'd even say get involved in the travel points game. I'd say, if you feel comfortable and disciplined using a credit card, definitely get yourself a good cashback credit card. So because otherwise you're leaving money on the table. Get one with no annual fee, so you're not paying anything for it. But some people aren't even comfortable using a credit card. They feel they can't be disciplined with their spending, and for those people, they shouldn't get a credit card at all. They should continue to use their debit card and simply use it, with money coming out of their bank account, or plain old cash, whatever works. So anyway, that's the first thing to keep in mind about travel rewards. If you are a traveler and you are looking to get travel for free, then travel rewards can be very, very lucrative. It really comes down to how much time and effort you want to put into it. You can put in just a little bit of time and effort and get free travel out of it. if you have a card that earns points or miles, just redeeming them for a ticket, if you need to get home for Thanksgiving or the holidays or whatever it might be, you can do that and use your points and miles that way. You're not necessarily going to get huge value for your points and miles that way, but you'll still get free travel, and it's still a good way to earn those flights and not have to pay for them. The people who are really, really into it, who spend a lot of time on it, those are the folks who can get in first class on international flights using their points and miles. And the way they do it is they do their homework. Those seats are not always easy to find. You have to be very flexible with your dates. You have to be able to sort of maybe make a stop or two because, to get the right flight that's available, that sort of thing. But that is how, when you look on Instagram and you see people saying, oh, I went around the world for $300 or whatever, that's how they're doing it. And they are doing it, to be clear. It's not some people are out there scamming, but the general concept is sound. Yeah. The general idea that you can do it is sound. I have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles, probably, well, tens of thousands, not including WWE, but I've traveled tens of thousands of miles around the world for free or at very low cost in first class and things like that, using points and miles. But, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of flexibility. And look, time is money. I do it because I also enjoy that process. To me, that goes back to it being a hobby and being a bit of a game to find that really terrific, awesome travel redemption.
What are some things that maybe people should be on the lookout for, like different terms, if they're considering getting one of these cards, things to avoid, things to look for, suggestions, things of that nature?
Yeah. So if you're looking to get into this, the first thing I always recommend is don't go out and get an airline credit card. Do not get a Delta credit card. Do not get an American credit card. Do not get a United credit card. And the reason for that is that if you get one of those cards, you are now locked into earning those types of miles. So if you get a Delta credit card, you are earning Delta Sky miles with that card, and there is no way you are going to be able to earn any other types of miles with that card. The cards that you should be looking for as a beginner are those cards that we call them flexible point cards. And they're issued by banks like Chase, American Express, Capital One, Citibank. Have these cards that earn bank points, basically. Chase's cards earn points called Chase Ultimate Rewards. American Express's cards earn American Express membership rewards. And the reason these points are better for beginners is because then you're not locked into one airline. Either you can use these points directly on the bank's website and redeem them for travel on any airline or for hotels or for car rentals or whatever it might be, or you can transfer those points to airlines directly. So if you have an American Express card that earns membership rewards, you can transfer those points to Delta and get Delta Sky Miles out of them that way, versus locking yourself into only Delta Sky Miles. So the first tip for any beginner is don't get an airline credit card. Get a card that earns flexible points. The two that I always recommend for beginners, one is from Chase. It's called the Chase Sapphire Preferred. If you've heard anything about travel credit cards, you've probably heard of Chase Sapphire Preferred. It's been around for a long, long time. It is one of the big popular cards. It's a very easy card to get. It's a very easy card to use. And then the other one is Capital One Venture card, which earns Capital One miles. And it's the same sort of deal. It's a fairly simple card to get. It's an easy card to use. And it has those same flexible miles that the Chase one does that you can use in a lot of different ways. They're also very cheap cards. Both cards only cost $95 a year. Those are good places to start if you're really just dipping your toe in the water.
Can they also pay for my insane check bag fees times 17?
So now that is a good question. If you are, say, flying Delta all the time and checking a bag on Delta all the time, then maybe a Delta card is a good card to get. But I would still get that Delta card. I'd spend whatever I need to on that card to earn the sign-up bonus that came from that card. And then I would take that card and throw it in a drawer. And I would not use it at all unless I happen to be flying Delta that day, because I'll still get that check bag fee waiver just by having that card on my account. I don't need to pay. I don't need to pay for my Delta ticket with that card. And I certainly don't need to buy anything else with that card because, again, I don't want to get locked into earning Delta miles. Now, obviously, Delta is hoping you do get locked into earning Delta miles and use the card. But I wouldn't bother. I would just throw that card in a drawer and use it only for the checked bag fee. But even that only makes sense if, one, you're traveling a lot, and two, traveling on the same airline over and over. If you're going from airline to airline and airline, then that's not going to work. You're not going to get that waived bag fee. In that case, it makes more sense to just maybe have a cashback card, earn cash back, and pay for the check bag. Or redeem your points for, say, a first class ticket, and then you get a free check back, with it. So there are ways to do that to avoid those bag fees that don't involve getting an airline credit card.
Yeah, I have my own gripe with bag fees. But anyways.
Well, we all do. Yeah.
Is there anything about travel stuff that I should be asking that I haven't?
I always say, we touched on this a little bit already. Travel rewards isn't for everyone. You do need to have some patience for it to really maximize it. Either you do need to, be willing to dig into a blog or a website a little bit, or, and this is where I'm going to put in a little plug for my own company.
Please.
You need to know how to use the technology. Because there's a lot of really great new things out there, like what I have. Our main product is called PointsPath. And what PointsPath does, it's a browser extension. You put it into your, Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge browser, you install it. And then every time you search for a flight with Google Flights, which, by the way, Google Flights is a great search engine that you should always be looking at. It's very fast. It's very easy. And it usually has all the best options when it comes to flights between A to B. With PointsPath installed, though, not only do you get all the information from Google Flights as far as cash fares, we add all the points prices in for every flight and then tell you which is the better deal for that flight. Should you use your cash or should you use your miles? Because a mile on American is not worth the same as a mile on Delta, is not worth the same as a mile on United. They're all worth different amounts. They all have different values. And to try and figure that all out manually is a real pain in the butt and a lot of time. PointsPath does all that work for you. And that's why I built it, to save you time. So that, because a lot of people say, I don't know when to use my miles and when to use cash. I don't want to spend hours reading about it. Just give me the answer. Just tell me for this flight, what's the answer? And that's exactly what PointsPath does. And it takes about 5 to 7 seconds to do it.
Awesome. If the people are interested in PointsPath, where should they go to find you or the company or any related things?
Yeah, pointspath.com. Pointspath.com will give you the access to the extension. You can download it right from there. We are on all the standard social media. We have an Instagram at PointsPath. We have a TikTok account. I don't think we have anything on it right now. But Twitter, all of that stuff, we have PointsPath. So definitely, and also if you want to reach out to me, I'm Julian at PointsPath, Julian at pointspath.com. Feel free to drop me an email. I read them all.
Awesome. So for you guys listening, all the links will be in the description, of course. Julian, any last nickels before we get you out of here?
No, if I had this has been really an interesting conversation. And I think if I had a takeaway personally from it, it goes back a little bit to something I said at the beginning, which is that look, we only get one go around here in life, right? We only get one chance at it. Do try and do something you love. And you said at the beginning, people say, well, it's hard to do something you love and also make money from it. And to some degree, that's true. I don't think you should start out trying to make money from the thing you love. But I think if you do the thing you love a lot and you get very good at it, there's usually some value there to somebody else. Maybe it doesn't become your full-time job, but it might become a side gig, or it might become something that you do on occasion and earn money from. Do find something you love to do and do it, and find the time for it. People say, oh, I don't have the time for that. Look, you have the time for things that you make time for. So make time for things you love. Make sure it's not, we all have our obligations. We all have our responsibilities, and time is needed for those things, but make sure you put aside some time for something you really love to do.
That is a perfect way to wrap it up. Julian, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed it. And for you guys listening, thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.